So let's start on common ground. Take a moment and breathe. Bring your mind to your breath and notice the sensations in your body, your feet on the ground. As we do this together at different places on the planet, we share in experiences that are common across humanity: breath, body sensations, connection with the earth, and conscious awareness. Reaching back in time to the first of our ancestors who noticed that they were awake, we participate in the conscious commons of life. Our awareness gives us the ability to put ourselves in another's shoes, to feel another's feelings, to connect with their hopes and fears. It gives us the potential for reciprocity and for compassion. Awareness also alerts us to danger and enables us to guard and defend ourselves and those we cherish. We are social creatures who live and often die by our group membership. We are wired both to survive and to belong. But our legitimate need for security and belonging can at any time tip over into greed and superiority, leading to the diminishment, rejection, and even the elimination of those outside our circle. We live our lives plotting a course between these two tendencies of awareness, of including and embracing the other, and excluding or rejecting the other. How we now navigate this course will determine the fate of this planet. There's nothing more human than the stories we tell about ourselves. Today, I'm telling you a story, one of danger and of hope. I chose the title Diversity or Doom, and doom is no exaggeration, as we've already seen, but nor is the hope that a fresh approach to leadership can help us find better solutions. And I want to challenge you to find that leadership in you. Diversity is a facet of and an asset to all living systems. The Earth's living systems are incredibly diverse and involve a very high degree of interdependency and cooperation. Their resilience and adaptability depend upon this. The smallest organism plays an essential role and has a dignity of place in the system. Excess predation, on the other hand, is rewarded with extinction. It's as if nature had an inbuilt moral code. Don't get too big for your boots or your boots will bite you. The delicate balance of life can only be maintained through the acceptance of what the late chief rabbi in the UK, Jonathan Sacks, called the dignity of difference. As a species, we are part of the biosphere, yet our net activity on the planet has, in the last few hundred years, set us on a course to doom, a course of our own making. We find ourselves in the midst of climate catastrophe, pandemics, and violent conflicts. Human and animal habitats are under threat. Rulers are bent on control of the land, wealth, and natural resources for the benefit of a few, often exploiting long-standing religious and ethnic divides. They have spawned a colossal refugee crisis. None of this is sustainable. If we're to survive and allow other species to thrive, our tendency to cooperation must now come to outweigh the Darwinian war of all against all paradigm, which has been favored by dominant cultures. A little note for our Chinese and American friends, I think. Let's take a deep breath and reflect upon the human story. We don't have to look far to see the deep fault lines in our societies. There are major inequalities in access to power, resources, and life chances across what we have come to refer to as diversity characteristics. Socioeconomic status, gender, race, ethnicity, disability, and relationship to the land. Even as our numbers rise exponentially and we become more diverse, the places of real power and wealth in human society are still populated by a relatively small and homogeneous group of people. Instead of equality, diversity, and inclusion, these places are characterized by inequality, homogeneity, and exclusion, even with the shifts of the balance of power globally. All systems, including human-led systems, involve feedback loops. These outcomes are symptoms of negative feedback loops. For example, during the current pandemic, we constantly risk responding in ways that seem rational, but end up deepening social divides. For example, failing to shield the vulnerable, shedding less organised and more marginalised sections of our workforce, thus increasing gender, racial, ethnic and socioeconomic inequalities, as the recent McKinsey report shows. Deeper inequalities also lead to a greater risk of infection spread, so the feedback loop is complete. The same is true of the prison system. We put in prison people who are already marginalised. For instance, they are poorer or they are minority racial and ethnic people. Those so-called crimes that they have committed often arise from their exclusion and marginalisation. And when they're released, they're even more marginalised and therefore more likely to end up impoverished and, of course, back in prison. We aim to correct criminality. Instead, we multiply it. Doesn't have to be this way. We can learn from the regenerative capacity of nature, its positive feedback loops. How many of you noticed signs of regeneration during the various lockdowns over the last summer? I found that wildflowers bloomed where before was close-mown grass. Hedgehogs appeared in the churchyard across the road. Birds populated the trees and their songs filled the air, which itself was cleaner. Strangers stopped in the street, sat together on benches at respectful distance, and shared stories of everyday life. Neighbourhoods spontaneously organised to help those who were isolated or sick. We practiced collaboration, cooperation and care. Despite the fear engendered by the pandemic, many of us expanded to allow others in. For nearly 2 decades now, research internationally has extolled the benefits of diversity and inclusion to businesses, particularly at leadership level. It has shown how these are not just nice to have, but essential for adaptation, innovation and success. Most of the research has focused upon gender, but there have also been studies relating to ethnicity, sexual orientation and disability. It's a classic win-win situation. Businesses can both do the right thing and benefit on bottom line indicators. All they have to do is expand to allow others into places of power and influence. So why don't they? Part of the answer lies in the conflict between our two countervailing tendencies, to expand and cooperate or to contract and exclude, thus triggering positive or negative feedback loops. Any challenge to existing privileges feels like a threat, particularly in dangerous times, and we are in dangerous times. And where there is threat, exclusion often wins out, but as we have seen, not always. Enter you and I. This moment in our history is crying out to each of us to make the most of expansive, loving and courageous sides of human nature, to commit to leadership that is inclusive and in service to more than ourselves and others like us. Now is the time to choose a regenerative approach to leadership that attends to the health of the whole, not just narrow self-interest. This means finding in ourselves leadership that is willing to recognize and share our privileges, not as an act of charity, you understand, but as a jointly understood survival necessity. To do this, we cannot avoid the discomfort of confronting our biases, prejudices, and assumptions. In the words of author Robert Johnson, we must learn to own our own shadow. And that is just the start of our journey. Biases are not merely individual. They are programmed by the families, societies, and organizations in which we have learned our place in the world. Our leadership must be committed to unlearning fear and greed-based habits in ourselves and others, and fostering and institutionalizing collaborative, cooperative habits of care of self and other. It's very hard to achieve, but I'm not sure the alternative is a walk in the park either. Look, we're nothing if not intelligent and compassionate, and right now we need both in order to respond to the urgent need for a planetary system that is critically ill. We won't be alone. We'll be with others who are willing to reach outside their comfort zones of gender, class, caste, disability, religion, sexual orientation, to do small and big, daily and periodic, extraordinary things to increase the diversity of lived experience, genes and cultures in any environment of which we are a part. It is essential now that we ensure that those who have been on the margins are afforded the dignity of place in the ecosystem and can bring their wisdom to decisions that will affect our common destiny. Echoing Nisha Anand, whose TED Talk, The Radical Act of Choosing Common Ground, challenged me to think differently, I would like to end this talk with a personal story. At the time of the partition of India in 1947 and the independence of India and Pakistan, my eldest uncle, a Muslim who was against partition, was a very young forestry officer in the current Indian Prime Minister's home state of Gujarat. Fearing for his safety in the intercommunal violence that accompanied partition, which claimed perhaps 2 million lives and resulted in the largest forced migration of people in history, he appealed for help to his Hindu colleagues. This was itself a huge risk. He had to trust that they would support rather than expose him. His gamble paid off. Despite the risks involved, his workmates helped save his life. He adopted a Parsi name. The Parsis were on the whole untouched by communal violence, and they conspired to hide his Muslim identity until the time of danger had passed. He was in his 20s. He later became the chief conservator of forest for the state of Gujarat. He married, he had 2 children, and lived into his 80s. The people who saved my uncle were not activists or diversity, equality, and inclusion specialists. They had not studied systems theory. They were ordinary people showing extraordinary bravery. In doing so, they acted to mitigate the huge negative feedback loop which had been activated across the subcontinent, harming people and relationships, threatening the very idea of a diverse and inclusive nation. Stories such as this, and you will no doubt find your own, remind us constantly that the presence of danger does not have to result in us clinging to our privileges or shutting out the other. We can remember to breathe, feel the earth beneath our feet, hear the hopeful songs of our ancestors, and decide instead to expand and allow the possibility of inclusion of others in the joint project of saving the world that we love. Thank you.